The thing you lost was not taken from you by accident. Read that again, slowly, because what I'm about to tell you is going to explain something that has been sitting in the back of your mind for months, maybe years, something you never had the right words for, something you felt deep in your chest every time you tried to move forward but kept getting pulled back by the memory of what used to be there. You know what I'm talking about. You felt it the moment it left. That person, that opportunity, that version of yourself, that dream that seemed so close you could almost touch it. And then, without warning, without explanation, without anything that made sense, it was gone. And the worst part wasn't losing it. The worst part was the silence that came after. The silence from heaven. The silence from the people around you. The silence inside yourself, because even you didn't know what to say to yourself anymore. But here's what I need you to understand right now, before we go any further. What left your life was not a mistake. It was not a punishment. It was not evidence that God forgot about you, or that your prayers went unheard, or that you somehow disqualified yourself from the life you were supposed to have. What left your life left for a reason that your current eyes cannot fully see yet. And by the time you finish watching this video, I mean really watching it, not just letting it play in the background, but sitting with it, feeling it, something is going to shift inside of you. A door is going to open in your understanding, and you are going to look back at the loss you've been grieving and finally see it differently. Stay with me, because this is the message you didn't know you needed. Section 1. The loss that didn't make sense there is a specific kind of pain that only a certain type of person ever has to carry. It's not the ordinary kind of loss, the kind that comes with a clear explanation, a logical reason, a story that makes sense when you tell it to someone else. No. The pain I'm talking about is the kind where you lost something that by every human standard you were supposed to keep. Something that looked like your blessing. Something that looked like your answered prayer. Something that, when it was in your life, made you feel like you were finally on the right path. And then it left. And you could not explain to anyone why it hurt as badly as it did, because from the outside, people would say things like everything happens for a reason, or God has something better, or you'll be okay. And you nodded, because what else do you do? But on the inside, in the quiet moments, in the 3 a.m. moments when the world went dark and it was just you and your thoughts, you weren't okay. You were confused, you were exhausted. You were quietly asking heaven a question you were almost afraid to voice out loud. Why? Why did you let me get that close, only to take it away? Why did it feel like mine if it wasn't meant to stay? Why did I pray, believe, trust, and still end up here in this empty space where something important used to be? You felt it before you could name it. This sense that the loss was somehow connected to something larger, that it wasn't random, that there was a purpose hidden inside the pain, even if you couldn't access it yet. You sensed this before anyone told you. You've known, somewhere beneath all the grief, that your story was not over, it was being rewritten. And that instinct, that quiet knowing, that persistent feeling that you are meant for something you haven't arrived at yet, that is not wishful thinking. That is not a coping mechanism. That is something real, something placed inside you on purpose for a purpose. Because here is the first thing I need you to understand about the thing that was removed from your life. It could not go where you are going, not won't, not shouldn't, could not. There are places God is taking you that require a certain kind of interior, a certain kind of emptiness, a certain kind of space that can only be created by loss. And the thing that left your life, whether you know it yet or not, was occupying space that your destiny needed. It was filling a room in your spirit that something greater was already being prepared to inhabit. But let me slow down here, because this is where most people make a critical mistake. When you first hear something better is coming, the human mind automatically starts doing a calculation. Okay, so I lost this, which means I'm about to get that. And you start imagining a replacement, a better version of the same thing, a bigger house, a new relationship, a different job. Something that looks like what you lost, but upgraded. And sometimes, yes, that's exactly what happens. But for the person watching this video, I don't think that's the full picture. I don't think what God is preparing for you is a replacement for what you lost. I think what God is preparing for you is something so fundamentally different, something that operates on such a different level, something that requires such a different version of you, that if you still had the thing you lost, you wouldn't have had the capacity to hold what's coming. Think about that. Not just a better thing, a bigger life, a different dimension of purpose, a calling that is incompatible with the person you were when you had the thing you lost. Section 2. Why you never fit. Before we go deeper, I need to ask you something that you might have been afraid to answer honestly. Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, persistent way. Like you were playing a role that was assigned to you before you were old enough to choose it. Like you spent years learning to fit into spaces that were never quite shaped like you. Like no matter how hard you tried, no matter how much you adjusted and adapted and softened the edges of who you were, you never fully fit. And the loneliest part wasn't being alone. The loneliest part was being surrounded by people and still feeling like a stranger in the room. You were in the relationship. You were at the table. You were part of the group, but you were never fully inside it, were you? There was always a layer of glass between you and full belonging. A distance you couldn't close no matter how much you tried, and you blamed yourself for it. You told yourself you were too sensitive, too much, too intense, too different. You tried to shrink. You tried to simplify. You tried to become easier for other people to understand, but you couldn't do it. Not really, because you cannot shrink a calling. This is what others couldn't understand about you, and honestly, most of them still can't. Because the way you experience the world, the depth at which you feel things, the way you see patterns that other people miss, the way you carry an awareness of something larger than what's immediately in front of you, that is not a personality quirk. That is not a character flaw. That is equipment. And equipment doesn't make sense outside of its purpose. A scalpel in the wrong hands looks dangerous. A key in the wrong door looks useless. And a person with a rare calling, placed inside an ordinary context, will always feel like something is wrong with them, when really the only thing wrong is the context. This is why you lost that thing. This is why that season ended. Because the context you were in, as familiar as it felt, as much as you loved certain parts of it, as much as it cost you to let it go, was not the right door for your key. Let me say that differently. You were not rejected. You were redirected. You were not abandoned. You were extracted. You were not left behind. You were moved forward to a place where the people around you could not yet follow. And yes, I know, that doesn't make the grief smaller. Knowing something was necessary doesn't make it hurt less. You can understand something in your mind and still feel it like a wound in your chest. You can know that God is in control and still cry in the shower. Both things are true. Both things are allowed. But here is something that happened the moment that person left, the moment that door closed, the moment that opportunity fell through, the moment that season ended. The process accelerated. I don't know if you noticed it. You might have been so focused on what you lost that you missed what started moving. But something shifted the moment the loss became final. Something in the spiritual dimension began to move faster. As if heaven had been waiting, not impatiently, but strategically, for that space to clear. Because you were not being punished when that thing was removed. You were being promoted. Section 3. The hidden pattern in your pain. I want you to do something that might feel uncomfortable. I want you to think back across the major losses of your life. Not just this one, all of them. The ones that shaped you. The ones that broke you open. The ones you thought you would never recover from. And I want you to ask yourself honestly, looking back, was there a pattern? Because here's what I've observed about people who carry a specific kind of calling, a calling that is larger than ordinary, that requires extraordinary preparation, that is meant to touch more lives than they can currently imagine. These people do not experience loss the way others do. Their losses are not random. Their losses are strategic. Their losses follow a pattern that only becomes visible from a distance. And the pattern goes like this. Something is given. It feels like a gift. It feels like confirmation. It feels like proof that the life you sensed you were meant for is finally beginning. And you open yourself to it. You invest yourself in it. You let yourself love it or need it or depend on it. And then it changes, or it leaves, or it betrays you, or it simply disappears and the explanation you're given makes no sense, or you're given no explanation at all. And you grieve, and you rebuild. And slowly, something new begins to emerge from the wreckage. A version of you that is quieter but more powerful, softer in some ways, stronger in others, more willing to trust, and somehow also more discerning, able to see things you could not see before. And then the pattern repeats. If this sounds familiar, it's because you are not living an ordinary life. You are living a life that is being actively shaped by something that sees further than you do. Most people will never experience this. Most people's lives follow a relatively linear path. They build, accumulate, expand, and progress in ways that are socially legible, emotionally comfortable, and chronologically predictable. Their losses are painful, but they make sense within the frame of ordinary human experience. But your losses have never quite fit that frame. Your losses have been strange, sudden. Sometimes they've come right at the moment when things were finally going well. Right at the peak of a season, when you thought you'd finally arrived, the rug was pulled. And you've asked yourself over and over again, am I cursed? Is something wrong with me? Why does this keep happening? But here is the revelation that changes everything. You are not cursed. You are being shaped. And the shaping that is required for the life you are meant to live is more intense than most people will ever need. Because the platform is larger. The influence is wider. The weight of what you're being prepared to carry is heavier. And you cannot give someone a weight they haven't been trained to hold. The losses, the ones that broke your heart, the ones that humiliated you, the ones that left you in the dark, the ones that cost you relationships and opportunities and seasons of your life. They were not punishments for your failures. They were the curriculum. And every single one of them was teaching you something that could not be taught any other way. Not from a book. Not from observation. Not from watching someone else go through it. There are certain kinds of wisdom that can only be formed in the furnace. There are certain levels of empathy that can only develop after you've been broken by something you loved. There are certain kinds of authority, the kind that actually changes lives, the kind that makes people feel truly seen and heard and understood, that can only come from someone who has genuinely suffered and come through the other side. You have been in the furnace. And what is being formed inside you right now is something that cannot be replicated, cannot be downloaded, cannot be faked. Section 4. Why the people left now, I want to talk about something specific. Something that might be the actual reason you clicked on this video, even if you didn't realize it when you pressed play. People left. Not just one person, multiple people. People you built your life around. People you trusted completely. People you would have done anything for. People who felt like permanent fixtures in your world, and then suddenly or gradually they were no longer there. Some of them left in ways that were kind. They faded, they drifted, they got busy. They moved on, and so did you, and the connection simply dissolved. But some of them left in ways that were not kind. They left when you needed them most. They left after seeing your vulnerability. They left after you'd already given them access to the deepest parts of who you are. They left in ways that felt like betrayal, like abandonment, like a violence you didn't know words could commit. And you've been carrying that, the weight of it. Not just the grief of them being gone, but the question it planted inside you. What is wrong with me that people keep leaving? I need you to stop asking that question, because the premise of the question is false. The people who left, the ones who disappeared, the ones who faded, the ones who walked away, even the ones who hurt you on the way out, they did not leave because something was wrong with you. They left because they could not carry the frequency of where you were going. I know that sounds abstract. Let me make it concrete. Every human being operates at a certain level of consciousness, a certain level of depth, a certain capacity for honesty, for growth, for sitting in discomfort, for choosing purpose over comfort. And most people, most good, decent, wonderful, loving people, operate at a level that is entirely incompatible with the path you are on. Not because they are bad people, not because they didn't love you. Some of them loved you deeply. Some of them tried. Some of them genuinely wanted to stay. But love is not always enough to bridge a gap that is fundamentally spiritual in nature. When you begin to grow, when your consciousness expands, when your discernment sharpens, when you stop being able to participate in the conversations and dynamics that used to feel normal to you, you create a gap between yourself and the people who are not growing in the same direction. And that gap creates friction, confusion, distance, sometimes resentment. And the human thing, the thing that feels compassionate, the thing that feels loyal, the thing that feels like love, is to stop growing. To go back to who you were. To shrink yourself back down to a size that fits comfortably inside the relationships you already have. But you couldn't do it. Could you? You tried. I know you tried. You tried to stay in the same conversations, play the same roles, pretend that the things that used to satisfy you still satisfied you. But they didn't. And the more you tried to pretend, the more alone you felt. Because you were alone, not physically, but existentially. You were in rooms full of people and feeling more isolated than you would have felt in silence. And that isolation wasn't a symptom of something broken inside you. That isolation was a symptom of something being born. When a person is in the process of becoming who they are truly meant to be, there is always a period of intense loneliness, a clearing, a wilderness, a season where the old connections no longer fit and the new ones haven't arrived yet. A season where you are between two worlds, too far from where you came from to go back, and not yet arrived at where you are going. You are in that season right now. And the people who left, whether gently or harshly, whether with your blessing or with your tears, they were not removed to punish you. They were removed to protect you, and more importantly, to protect the version of you that is still being formed. Because here's the truth that most people never say out loud. Some relationships are not built to survive growth. Some connections are built specifically for one chapter of your story. And when that chapter ends, the characters who belong to that chapter must also exit. Not because they failed, not because you failed, but because the story is moving forward and not everyone is written for every chapter. The people who left were chapter characters. The people God is preparing for your next season are designed for a completely different kind of story. They will recognize you in a way the old connections never quite could. They will understand the depth of you without needing you to explain yourself. They will carry a frequency that matches where you're going, not where you've been. But they cannot arrive until the old chapter closes. And the people who left, they closed it. Section 5. The opportunity that didn't work out. Let me talk now about the opportunity. You know the one I'm talking about. The door that was almost open. The thing that seemed like it was finally happening. The opportunity that had your name on it. You could feel it. You could see it. You were already beginning to imagine your life on the other side of it. And then it didn't happen. Maybe it fell through at the last moment. Maybe someone else got what you were supposed to get. Maybe circumstances changed. Maybe you made a decision that, in retrospect, seems like it cost you everything. Maybe someone made a decision about you for reasons that had nothing to do with your actual worth, and it closed a door that you needed to be open. And you've been thinking about it ever since, revisiting it, playing back the timeline, wondering what you could have done differently, wondering if there is a version of your life running in parallel somewhere where that opportunity worked out, where you made a different choice, where the door stayed open. I need you to hear this very clearly. That door was not supposed to open, not because you weren't ready, not because you weren't qualified, not because you weren't deserving, but because what was on the other side of that door was not what your destiny required. I know that's hard to accept, especially if the opportunity looked right, especially if it aligned with everything you had been praying for, everything you thought God was pointing you toward, especially if the timing seemed perfect and the pieces seemed to be falling into place. But here is something that very few people understand about divine timing. God is not just planning what you receive. God is planning what you can handle receiving in such a way that it doesn't destroy you or distort you. There are blessings that arrive too early that become burdens. There are positions that are reached too soon that corrupt rather than elevate. There are platforms that, if they come before the character to hold them has been fully formed, will amplify your weaknesses instead of your strengths. And because God can see not just the opportunity, but the version of you who would receive it, at this moment, with this level of development, with this specific set of unhealed wounds and unresolved patterns and untested faith, the door closed. Not to hurt you, not to deny you, but to protect you from a version of success that would have ultimately cost you something you cannot afford to lose. Because I need you to understand something about the life you are being prepared for. It is not small. It does not operate on the same scale as what you have been able to imagine from inside your current season. The influence you are meant to carry, the lives you are meant to touch, the purpose you are meant to fulfill, it is larger than the opportunity that closed. And if you had walked through that door, if that relationship had worked out, that job had come through, that chapter had continued, you would have been contained within it. You would have been capped. You would have built a life that was good enough, comfortable enough, externally impressive enough, that you never would have had the desperation, the hunger, the holy dissatisfaction, the willingness to go deeper, that is required to access the life that is actually yours. God closed the door to save you from settling, even if you didn't know you were settling, even if it looked like the dream, even if it hurt like loss. You sensed this before anyone told you. There was a moment, maybe right after the door closed, maybe weeks later, maybe in a quiet prayer, where you felt something strange. Not just grief, but relief. Not just disappointment, but a whisper of something that felt almost like freedom. A sense that, as painful as it was, something had been lifted from you. That wasn't delusion. That wasn't a coping mechanism your mind invented to protect you from pain. That was your spirit recognizing that a cage had been removed. Section 6. The major revelation. The weight of your calling. I need to stop here and tell you something. Something that I believe you have been circling for a long time, approaching from different angles, feeling the edges of without quite being able to name it. Here it is. The reason your life has looked different from other people's lives, the reason the path has been harder, longer, more confusing, more painful, more isolating, is not because you are less favored. It is because you are more entrusted. And entrusted is a different category than favored. Favored means you receive more. Entrusted means you are given more to carry. And carrying more, true carrying, not just claiming the title, but actually bearing the weight of a larger than ordinary purpose, requires a preparation that is longer, harder, and lonelier than anything the people around you have had to endure. Think about every person in history who carried a weight that changed the world. Think about their lives. Think about the season before the breakthrough. Think about the isolation, the misunderstanding, the doors that closed, the relationships that failed, the moments where it seemed like everything they believed about their purpose was wrong. Every single one of them had a wilderness. Every single one of them had a loss, often multiple losses, that stripped away something they thought was essential for the life they were trying to build. And in every single case, the loss was the beginning of the preparation. Not the end of the story, the beginning of the preparation. Now let me tell you something specific about your preparation. Something that explains what has been happening in your life that you couldn't make sense of. You have been in a process of excavation. God has been removing systematically, strategically, sometimes painfully, everything that was obscuring the truest version of who you are. Everything that you were using as a buffer between yourself and the full weight of your calling. Everything that was providing a sense of security, significance, or identity that was actually borrowed, taken from external sources, rather than built on the foundation of who you actually are at your core. The relationships that gave you your sense of worth, the opportunities that gave you your sense of direction, the achievements that gave you your sense of value, the versions of yourself you performed for different audiences, none of which were entirely real. All of it being removed, not cruelly, but completely. Because the life you are being prepared for cannot be built on borrowed foundations. The calling you carry cannot be funded by someone else's approval. The platform you are being positioned for cannot be held up by an identity that is constructed rather than discovered. And so the removal had to happen. The people had to go. The opportunities had to fail. The comfortable structures had to crumble. The things you were using to avoid meeting yourself fully had to disappear, so that the only thing left was you, in your truest and most essential form, face to face with God and with the reality of what you actually are. This is what others could not understand. They looked at your losses and saw failure. They looked at your empty season and saw stagnation. They looked at the stripped-away version of your life and felt sorry for you, or confused by you, or in some cases, smug about their own seemingly more stable path. But what they were seeing was not failure. What they were seeing was a building being cleared for a new foundation. What they were seeing was a field being tilled before the planting season. What they were seeing was an instrument being tuned before it plays. You have been in the tuning process, and tuning is not comfortable. Tuning sounds dissonant. Tuning requires pulling strings tighter than they were, or loosening them further than feels safe. Tuning requires a silence that can be mistaken for inactivity. But the instrument that has been properly tuned produces a sound that was never possible in its untuned state. And the life that is on the other side of your loss, the life that was always intended for you, the life that required this specific level of preparation, is going to produce something that you could not have produced before. Not just a better life, a truer one. One that is specifically, precisely, irreplaceably yours. Section 7. The hidden work of isolation. Let me talk about the loneliness for a moment, not to romanticize it, not to pretend it doesn't hurt, but to tell you something about it that might change the way you've been experiencing it. The loneliness you have been living in is not a side effect of your path. It is a feature of it. I know that's a hard sentence to sit with, but stay with me. There are things that can only be deposited in a person in silence. There is a kind of strength that can only be built in isolation. There is a depth of self-knowledge that cannot be developed in the noise of constant companionship. There is a level of communion with something deeper than human relationship, a connection to source, to purpose, to the divine, that requires a season where the human noise is stripped away so you can hear something quieter and more important. You've been in that season. And in that season, things have been deposited in you that you aren't even fully aware of yet. Insights that will emerge when the right moment arrives. A capacity for patience that you didn't choose, but that was built into you by years of waiting. An empathy for people in pain that can only come from someone who has genuinely been in darkness themselves. A level of faith, not the faith of someone who has never been tested, but the faith of someone who has been brought to the edge of what they could endure and found something there that sustained them even when they didn't understand it. That is a different kind of faith. That is the kind of faith that other people can feel when they're in the room with you. And you don't fully know what you've been given in the dark yet. You can't, because the purpose of the isolation is not yet finished. But here's what I need you to hear. Nothing that happened in your isolation was wasted. Not the nights you cried without knowing why. Not the prayers that felt like they went nowhere. Not the questions you couldn't answer. Not the confusion you lived inside for what felt like too long. Not the grief that came in waves. Not the emptiness that seemed like it might be permanent. None of it was wasted. Every moment of it was forming something. Every uncomfortable silence was teaching you something about who you are when no one is watching. Every night you made the choice to keep going despite having no external evidence that going was worthwhile. That was building something inside you that cannot be built any other way. Chosen people are formed in private before they are revealed in public. The world sees the emergence. The world sees the moment of breakthrough, the arrival, the elevation, the impact. The world does not see the years that preceded it. The years in the wilderness. The years of being unseen, misunderstood, overlooked, underestimated. But those years are not less important than the public ones. In many ways, they are more important, because everything that happens in public is only as deep as what was built in private. Your private season has been long. I know that. I know you're tired. I know there have been moments where you questioned everything, your calling, your sanity, your worthiness, the reality of what you've been believing for. I know there have been moments where you looked at your life and thought, maybe I was wrong about who I am. Maybe I invented the sense of purpose. Maybe the life I sensed was meant for me was a story I told myself to survive the ordinary. But you couldn't stay in that doubt for long, could you? Because something inside you kept reasserting itself, kept insisting, kept saying, no, this is real. What you sense about yourself is real. The life you're being prepared for is real. Don't give up. That something is not your ego. That something is not delusion. That something is the voice of the purpose that is inside you, calling you forward even when everything around you looks like evidence of the opposite. Trust that voice. Section 8. Why your breakthrough has been delayed. Now I want to address something directly, because I know this question is inside you, even if you've been afraid to ask it. Why has it taken so long? You believed early. You sensed your calling early. You made changes, sacrifices, commitments. You walked away from things that didn't align. You did the inner work. You stayed faithful in the seasons where being faithful cost you things other people couldn't see. And still, the breakthrough hasn't come. Or if it has come, it hasn't come in the form or the magnitude that you believed it would. And you're starting to wonder, not cynically, but genuinely, painfully, whether the timeline you were given was wrong, whether the faith you carried was misdirected, whether the promise was real or whether you misread something somewhere. Here is the answer that I don't think you're going to hear anywhere else. The delay is not a denial, and the delay is not a punishment. The delay is a calibration. Let me explain what I mean by calibration. When something is being prepared for a purpose that has extreme precision requirements, when the margin for error is small, when the stakes are high, when what is being built must last, the preparation process is longer, more detailed, more rigorous, more thorough, more careful. You are not a mass-produced vessel. You are a specific instrument being prepared for a specific purpose that requires a specific kind of precision, and precision takes longer. But there's something else in the delay that I need you to understand, something that goes beyond just more preparation time. The delay has been creating alignment. Your breakthrough cannot arrive in isolation. The people who need to encounter you cannot find you before they are ready for what you carry. The platform that is being prepared for you requires infrastructure that takes time to build. The network of connections, circumstances, provisions, and openings that must align for your purpose to be fully released. These things are not yet all in place, and God is not in the habit of sending you out before the table is set. Think about what it would mean to arrive early, to step into your purpose before the people who need you are ready, before the resources are in place, before the timing is right. You would walk into a room that wasn't prepared for you, with tools you had developed for a purpose that hadn't yet opened, and you would exhaust yourself trying to make something happen through effort rather than alignment. But when the right moment arrives, when all the pieces are in position, when the people are ready, when the door opens at precisely the right time, you're going to walk in and everything will move differently than it has ever moved before. Not because you're suddenly more talented, not because you're suddenly more willing, but because you will be in alignment. And alignment creates a momentum that effort alone can never replicate. You have felt the difference between striving and flowing. You know what it feels like to push against a door that isn't opening. You know the exhaustion of trying to make something work that simply isn't ready to work yet. You've lived in seasons of striving. What's coming is a season of flowing. But flowing requires patience. Flowing requires trusting the current. Flowing requires letting go of the specific timeline you built in your head and trusting the one that is being built for you. And I know releasing that control is one of the hardest things a purpose-driven person can do. Because you're not passive, You're not a person who waits easily. You're a person who moves, who creates, who builds. And being asked to wait when everything in you wants to go, that is its own kind of suffering. But the waiting is not inactivity. The waiting is positioning, and positioning determines everything.
Here is something I want you to sit with. Think about you were before the loss, before the big thing was removed, before the season of stripping away began. Not to judge the version of you, not to feel nostalgic for them, but really look at them clearly. Who were they? What were they building their identity on? What were they afraid of? What were they unable to do, unable to see, unable to face? I tell you what I see when I look at the person most people are before their breaking season. They are powerful but fragile, gifted but performance dependent, full of potential but running on mixture of genuine calling and borrowed validation, capable of glimpsing depth but still addicted to the surface, believing in their destiny in theory, but not yet willing or perhaps not yet able to commit to it with everything they have. That person could not do what you are being called to do, not because they weren't worthy, but because they weren't forget. There is a version of you that exists on the other side of everything you've been through, a version that have been shaped by the fire, a version that carries wisdom that was earned rather than learned, a version that has been broken in the specific ways that were necessary to remove arrogance, intelligent performance, and self protection and replace them with something more durable, something more genuine, something that can carry the weight of what is coming without cracking under it. You are becoming the person, and the person you are becoming could not have come into existence without everything you have been through. The lose had to happen, the people had to leave, the opportunity had to fail, the comfortable structures had to crumble, the silence had to be sustained for long enough that the noise inside you finally quieted and you could hear who you actually are, because you could not find who you actually are until you lost who you thought you were. This is one of the most consistent law of spirit development. The identity you build from the outside in the identity constructed from other people's approval, social spirit scripts, early life experience, performance, comparison. That identity must be disrupted before the true identity that exists beneath it can emerge. And disruption is not comfortable. Destruction looks like loss. Disruption feels like failure. Disruption from the inside feels like falling apart, and from the outside looks like a life that isn't working. But from heaven's perspective, disruption looks like emergence. It looks like a butterfly destroying its cocoon. It looks like a seed cracking open underground. It looks like a dawn that requires the full darkness that precedes it, and it's precisely as violent, as uncomfortable, and as necessary as any of those things. You are not falling apart. You are emerging.